He sat on a throne built by his own father's sword, and for 37 years he ruled a nation that the West called the most stable friend it had in the entire Middle East. Palaces filled with French furniture, oil money pouring in faster than anyone could count it, a coronation so extravagant that kings and presidents from around the world flew in just to watch him crown himself. And then, in a matter of weeks, all of it disappeared. The man who once shook hands with American presidents as an equal was suddenly begging country after country to simply let him in, to give him a bed, a doctor, a place to die. This is the story of the last Shah of Iran, a man who believed he was building the future and never saw the past catching up behind him.
Mohammad Reza Pahlavi never truly chose his life. It was chosen for him the day his father, a former army officer with almost no formal education, crowned himself Shah and declared that his son would inherit an empire that did not yet exist outside of his father's imagination. Reza Shah was a hard man, a man who built railways and modern buildings and a national army out of nothing, but who also ruled his own children with the same iron discipline he used on the country. Mohammad Reza grew up terrified of his father. He would later say that he never once remembers a warm conversation between them. He was sent away to school in Switzerland as a boy, alone, in the cold, learning French and English while his father built a kingdom for him to inherit whether he wanted it or not. In 1941, everything changed in a single, humiliating afternoon. British and Soviet forces invaded Iran during the Second World War, accusing Reza Shah of being too friendly with Nazi Germany. They gave him a choice that was not really a choice at all: abdicate or be removed by force. Mohammad Reza was 21 years old when he watched his father, the most powerful man he had ever known, the man who terrified him his entire childhood, broken and exiled from the country he built. The new Shah was placed on the throne not because Iran chose him, but because foreign powers found him useful, young, and easy to control. He began his reign already knowing, in the quiet places no one else could see, that the crown on his head had been placed there by other men's hands. For the next decade, Mohammad Reza was a Shah in name only. Real power belonged to Parliament, to the British oil companies who controlled Iran's most valuable resource, and increasingly to a popular, fiery prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh, who dared to do something no one had done before. He nationalized Iran's oil. He told the British and the Americans that Iranian oil belonged to Iranians. The country erupted with pride. For the first time, ordinary Iranian people felt like their nation belonged to them. And the Shah, watching from his palace, understood with a sinking heart that the people did not love him. They loved Mossadegh. In 1953, the unthinkable happened. The CIA and British intelligence orchestrated a coup against Mossadegh, and for a few terrifying days, it failed. The Shah, convinced the coup had collapsed, fled the country in panic, landing in Rome with his wife and almost no luggage, genuinely believing his reign was finished forever. He sat in a hotel room not knowing if he would ever see Iran again. Then, days later, the coup succeeded after all. Mossadegh was arrested, and Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was flown back to Tehran, not as a beloved king returning home, but as a man restored to his throne by foreign hands for the second time in his life. He never forgot that feeling. And neither did the Iranian people who had cheered for Mossadegh. Restored to power by foreign hands, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would never again be a Shah who depended on anyone else's permission to rule. He built SAVAK, his secret police, trained in the early years by the CIA itself, and gave it the power to arrest, to torture, to disappear anyone who reminded him of how fragile his throne truly was. The fear that had followed him since childhood, the fear of being small, of being controlled, of being placed and removed by other people's hands, hardened into something else entirely. Control. Total, absolute control. And for a while, it worked. Oil money began flooding into Iran in amounts the country had never seen. The Shah launched what he called the White Revolution, a sweeping program of land reform, women's voting rights, literacy programs, and rapid industrialization. To the outside world, it looked like a miracle. Tehran filled with skyscrapers and traffic jams. Iranian women became doctors, judges, pilots. American and European leaders called him a visionary, a moderate, a model for the entire Muslim world. In 1971, he held a coronation so extravagant it became legendary, a tent city in the desert at Persepolis, flown in chefs from Paris, kings and presidents from around the globe applauding a man who, underneath the medals and the silk, was still the frightened boy whose father had been dragged away by foreign soldiers. But underneath the glittering surface, something was breaking. The land reforms displaced millions of poor farmers into overcrowded cities with no jobs waiting for them. The wealth from oil concentrated in the hands of a small elite around the Shah, while ordinary Iranians watched prices rise faster than their wages. And for anyone who spoke against this, Savak was waiting. Universities were watched. Mosques were watched. Conversations in private homes were sometimes watched. An entire generation of Iranians grew up learning to whisper, learning that disagreement could mean a knock on the door at 3 in the morning that no one ever spoke about afterward. In the late 1970s, the anger that had been pressed down for decades finally found a voice, and that voice belonged to an exiled cleric named Ayatollah Khomeini, speaking from France through smuggled cassette tapes that spread through Iran's mosques and bazaars faster than any government could stop them. What began as scattered protests grew into something the Shah had never faced before, not foreign armies, not foreign spies, but his own people, millions of them, filling the streets of Tehran chanting for his removal. The Shah, the man who had built an army of nearly 500,000 soldiers, who commanded one of the most feared intelligence services on earth, looked out at his own capital city and, for the first time in his life, understood that there was no enemy left to blame. Only his own people, and they wanted him gone. On January 16, 1979, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi left Iran for the last time. The official story called it a vacation. Everyone, including the Shah himself, knew the truth. He stood on the steps of the plane at Mehrabad Airport, an old man now, thin, already quietly fighting the cancer he had hidden from the world for years, and he wept. Soldiers who had sworn loyalty to him for decades stood at attention with tears running down their own faces, not entirely sure if they were watching their king leave for a holiday or watching the end of an empire that their fathers and grandfathers had served. 2 weeks later, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Tehran to crowds in the millions, and the country the Shah had spent his entire life trying to build simply ceased to exist. What followed was perhaps the cruelest part of his story. The man who had once been welcomed in Washington as one of America's closest allies, who had dined with presidents and been called the policeman of the Persian Gulf, suddenly found himself with nowhere to go. Country after country, frightened of angering the new revolutionary government in Iran, frightened of the hostages now being held inside the American embassy in Tehran, quietly closed their doors to him. Egypt took him in for a while. Morocco hesitated. The Bahamas grew uneasy. Mexico eventually said yes, but only for a time. He moved from country to country with his wife, his small staff, and a body that was failing him more every week. A former king of one of the most powerful nations in the Middle East, reduced to asking, gently, desperately, if anyone would simply let him stay. He finally found refuge in Egypt, where President Anwar Sadat, an old friend, gave him what no one else would. A place to be sick. A place to be quiet. A place to die without cameras following his every breath. On July 27, 1980, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi died in Cairo, 18 months after leaving Iran, the cancer finally taking what decades of power, fear, and revolution had not. He was given a state funeral by Sadat, one of the few genuinely warm gestures shown to him in those final months, attended by a handful of former allies and almost no one from the countries that had once called him indispensable. Today, Iran remains shaped by the revolution that ended his reign, and historians still argue fiercely about who he really was. To some, he was a visionary modernizer who tried to drag a poor nation into the 20th century too quickly for its own people to bear. To others, he was a puppet of foreign powers from the very first day he was crowned, a man who never escaped the fear planted in him as a young man watching his own father dragged away. Perhaps the truest answer is the saddest one. He was simply a man who never had the chance to find out who he might have been without a crown forced onto his head, who spent his entire life trying to prove he belonged on a throne that, in the end, the world quietly decided it no longer had room for.